It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Ron Rosmann has been farming for more than 50 years. In 1973, he gave up his plans for graduate school and moved back home to run the family farm near Harlan. 10 years later, he did something radical. He stopped using chemical inputs. Ron Rosmann became one of the founding members of Practical Farmers of Iowa, a farmer-led community that focuses on sustainable agriculture. His memoir is A Practical Farmer's Journey, a history of community, stewardship, and resilience. There is a PFI Field Day on the Rosmann family farm coming up on August 22nd, and Ron will also be on the other side of the state speaking at Pulpit Rock Brewing in Decorah at 7 p.m. on October 27th. And he's with me now. Hello, Ron.
Good morning, Charity.
Thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you back. And you begin your book with the history of the land you farm and some history of the people who lived on this land before European settlement. But I want to start today with your origin. You grew up on this farm near Harlan, the third of four boys. And did you always think that you were going to grow up to be a farmer?
No, I did not. Uh, I was, I'm sorry.
Are you hearing an echo, Ron?
I, I'm sorry. I got another call here. I'm sorry. I'm good.
Okay,
So,
great. So when you
uh,
were growing up, you didn't necessarily think you were going to be a farmer?
well, I did when I was in high school, and I started out in farm operations at Iowa State University back when they were on the quarter system. And so I started in the winter quarter of 1968. But we know the late 60s were very traumatic times for all of us and the college students especially, maybe because of the war in Vietnam. So uh, I decided to get out of farm operations, and I went into studying biology, and I got my BS in biology. But I didn't know for sure what I wanted to do. And so my dad said, "Why don't you try it for a year? And if you don't like it, and you can always go back to school." But how it turned out is I never looked back, and I knew it was the right decision to make.
So when you got back to farming in 1973, I mean, you had really gone through a transformative experience, as most people do when they make their way from adolescence into adulthood and trying to figure out who you were, what you wanted. When you got back on the farm and you were working with your dad again, do you remember feeling like, okay, this is what I want to be doing?
Yes, I decided very early on that I loved the independence of being a farmer, of uh, of running your own business, and of working with nature, being outside, and being able to make a difference in your small community. And it's what I noticed when I came back is that even though I changed a lot for the 5 years I was gone from Shelby County, uh, having to grow up, I found out very quickly that our rural communities were changing even more because it really coincided with, well, in the book, I have three sections in the book. The beginning of a promise, which is, how what our immigrant forefathers found when they came here, the chance for many to buy land, start farms, start rural communities and businesses. And then the second part of the book is what I call the breaking of the promise. And that was about the same time that I came back to the farm in 73 when really the industrial corporate model of agriculture really started taking hold here in Iowa. And we heard such things from Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz statements such as "get big or get out" and "plant fence row to fence row." So that's that's what I started to encounter when I came back, and it was quite a wake-up call for me. That is for sure.
That was a real time of transformation for farmers in Iowa. And I mean, I don't know that there's ever been a period of farming in Iowa that hasn't been a period of transformation. But the 70s were kind of a boom time for farmers, and getting big seemed exciting and an opportunity to really make money in farming in a way that maybe they hadn't been able to before. What were your feelings with the pressure coming from this, policies in DC, and just how the world was shifting? How were you feeling about that?
Well, there was a lot of new things happening. The commodity markets started just coming fast and furious in terms of yeah, well, the Russian uh, grain disaster, where uh, started this tremendous rise of prices in wheat because the United States ended up exporting most of its wheat to Russia, not knowing that it was based on faulty data. But, we were hearing that the United States was really going to start feeding the world, and that we would export our way to profitability for the long term. But it didn't really turn out that way, did it? And that is uh, partly because technology was developing in other countries, and other countries started planting corn and soybeans too, not just us. So there was, started competition, and that's where we're at today, of course. But in our case, we never gave up the diversified crop rotations that included small grains like oats, included pasture for cows and calves, it included hogs, farrow to finish. Uh, yes, we had corn and soybeans, but we were always penalized by the farm programs historically for farming with conservation and stewardship in mind. We actually were penalized in the form of receiving less subsidies. So that bothered me a lot. And so in the book, I really wanted to talk about the truth of farm policies from early on. And, that included the boom and bust cycles, uh, which started in after the first one started after the Civil War, actually, when new lands were being developed by new immigrants west of the Mississippi River, including, Iowa, et cetera. And so there was and new technology was coming along, so there was a glut of production, and that led to the first bust cycle. And then we experienced that again in the 20s and 30s, which was devastating for Iowa and other farming states. And then in the 70s again, that was when this boom was really pronounced, and land prices skyrocketed. And we all know what happened with the bust in the 80s. So we were, had to live through those times. And that actually led to a lot of the reasons that was the foundation of the reasons for why we quit using chemicals and decided to kind of jump off the freight train of growing only corn and soybeans and seek a different path.
So I want to talk about your personal choice in the early 80s to give up almost all chemical inputs. That was a really unusual time, it feels, to take that step. Of course, you're at the beginning of the farm crisis, and your diversification had actually given you a little bit of a cushion. As you said, you'd been not received as much from government policy, but at least you had your hands in a number of different kinds of work on the farm. What was it that inspired you? And we only have a minute here, Ron, so you're probably going to have to tell me more after the break. But what was it that made you think, oh, we could be doing this differently?
Well, on the chemical side, it was my degree in biology, and started to really learn on a practical basis how how things work in how plants grow and the carbon cycle and photosynthesis and that led to practicing ecological practices where nature provides her ecosystem services for free. So the only one making money there is the farmer, not all the input companies. So I found that very appealing, and that was a way to survive in the 80s. It was to reduce our inputs, but actually increase our net return through PFI, through the Practical Farmers of Iowa on-farm research model, where we could test whether or not we could profitably and reduce herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers.
Ron, we're going
That
to take
was,
a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. I am talking with Ron Rosmann. He is one of the founding members of Practical Farmers of Iowa, and he's published his memoir, A Practical Farmer's Journey, A History of Community, Stewardship, and Resilience. We will talk more in a moment. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News. It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Today I'm talking with Ron Rosmann. He's been farming near Harlan for more than 50 years. In 1973 is when he began farming on the family farm. And 10 years after that, he decided to stop using chemical inputs. He also became one of the founding members of Practical Farmers of Iowa, a farmer-led community that focuses on sustainable agriculture. His memoir is A Practical Farmer's Journey, A History of Community, Stewardship, and Resilience. Coming up in a few minutes, we're going to bring Steve Hopkins into the conversation. He's also a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa and an innovator in regenerative agriculture and water conservation. But before we do that, Ron, I want to talk more about the big change that you made. So it was the farm crisis. You went down to Boone and you visited a farm where they had given up chemical inputs. Tell me about that.
yes, that was a very important moment in my life. And Dick and Sharon Thompson were discovering how to incorporate randomized replicated research plots in a very innovative design on their farm, aided by the Rodale Institute at that time. And I was amazed that in 1982, I was using all the herbicides out there. I did that for the first 10 years of farming. But Dick had, I had more weeds using herbicides than Dick did with not using herbicides. And that was one thing, but another was that he was getting practical answers to his farming questions through on-farm research trials, and that became how PFI started, with the help of Iowa State University and Iowa State University Extension, and namely Dr. Jerry DeWitt was very instrumental in that. And So, and we started as a group of about 100 farmers, like-minded farmers. For well, it grew quickly though, because of the concerns that farmers were raising about water quality, soil erosion, and the intense use of fertilizers and pesticides. And that's when we started hearing things about groundwater contamination, which we're still here. In fact, we're hearing a lot about it today in terms of uh, worsening water quality in the state of Iowa. So, we started addressing those concerns a long time ago now. And we have proven that these practices work and what we're doing is profitable and it's better for the environment and for people. So a lot of things started coming together. And today we have 10,000 members in the Practical Farmers of Iowa. And uh, we have a very large membership of conventional farmers who are involved with cost share with cover crops. So we try to have programs for all shapes, sizes, and kinds of farmers. It doesn't matter if you're organic or if you grow vegetables or if you're, a 2,500 acre farmer. But the thing that is so important is that we're all trying to figure out how to uh, be better stewards of the land and care about our neighbors and our rural communities.
Well, and Ron, you were really in at the beginning of this revolution that was not, I called it something radical, and it was. I'm sure your neighbors thought it was pretty radical when you made that shift back in 1983. But this was science and practice, and it was neighbors helping neighbors and people sharing information, not just in Iowa, although Practical Farmers of Iowa is a very strong Iowa-based group, but nationwide and worldwide, as the growing understanding of how to farm with either fewer chemical inputs in a more sustainable way or organically has really grown over these decades. You did eventually become certified organic. Give me an overview of your operation these days.
Yes, uh, thank you for that because I wanted to talk about the next generation. I am semi-retired now. I'm 76 years old, but Maria and I have three sons. Two of the sons, the oldest and the next son, have taken over the farm, and I don't have to pay bills anymore. They've taken over the finances, and it's just phenomenal. And we're doing that. We're supporting three families on a 700-acre farm where most of the income, or at least a lot of it, comes from the farming enterprise, not from off-farm income. Of course, our middle son and his wife own and operate Milk and Honey, a farm-to-table restaurant in Harlan. That's been going for about 15 years now. And then my wife, Maria, started an on-farm store uh, about 2012 that she sells our beef, pork, popcorn, and eggs. That's our four labels, and then many other things in the on-farm store. So yeah, we're very diversified. Uh, uh, I think a theme of the book that I would like to touch on a little bit is these three sections: the beginning of the promise, the breaking of the promise and the how to restore the promise. That's the last part of the book. And when we look at the policies, that's what I wanted to emphasize, is to tell the truth about what really happened. You know, one thing that got us through the 80s was hogs. Hogs were always the mortgage lifter. You know, there was enough profitability there that it helped farmers survive the 80s. But then in 98, you know, the bottom went out and we lost 10,000 pork producers in 1 year. And the consolidation, you know, has led to where now we have 40 million hogs in the state of Iowa annually, at least that many. But they're concentrated in very few operations and owned by very few players. And I just think, you know, both rural communities and farms never reach their potential because of the industrial model of agriculture that really runs the state now and does not create the kind of jobs that we once had, and does not, you know, we're not growing food is another problem. We import 95% of our food. We grow corn for ethanol and for feed for livestock, but we import 95% of our food. So that's a big key point in what we and others in Practical Farmers of Iowa and other organizations as well. There's many organizations that are starting to collaborate on the same goals, and that is to create a more sustainable food system and to have food grown in Iowa and processed in Iowa and marketed in Iowa.
And Ron, you make it clear in your writing, you know, going back to the 1970s with the idea of get big or get out, a lot of people got big and a lot of people got out. We have seen so many family farms become part of a consolidated, much larger farm in Iowa. So many families have gotten out of farming over the decades. You believe we need more farms and more farmers?
Yes. Throughout the book, I keep saying we need more farmers, not less, for lots of reasons. Our food and agriculture and much of our corporate economies just keep getting bigger. The technologies are becoming more costly, and that's very evident in agriculture. And that's why I, for one, am very concerned about the future, because what beginning farmer, unless they are, you know, have a family that has a lot of wealth, how can they start farming? Because the costs of technology, meaning tractors and combines, is getting out of hand for farms like ours, you know, the mid-size farms. And now with artificial intelligence, we just keep pushing people further and further away from what I think is one of the core things of our being, and that is being one with nature, growing your own food, being, you know, having a communion with nature. And I call it striving to have social justice for people and ecological justice for our Mother Earth. And regardless of what people may say or not say, Mother Nature and the earth will get the last word. And we see it, you know, we just saw it again this morning with derechos in Iowa. Our weather is changing, And it's due to just plain our planet is warming up too much. And that is the science. That's the truth. And we can't deny it. We can deny it, but it's Mother Nature will get the last word.
Ron, I want to bring our other guest into the conversation. I'm talking with Ron Rosmann. He's one of the founding members of Practical Farmers of Iowa and has recently published his memoir, A Practical Farmer's Journey, A History of Community, Stewardship and Resilience. Steve Hopkins is also here. He's also a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa and an innovator in regenerative agriculture and water conservation. He is a former dairy farmer and spent many years working for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Charity. Great to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. And I want to shift the conversation to talk more about the work of Practical Farmers of Iowa and some of the options and opportunities that farmers have in Iowa to embrace sustainable or regenerative agriculture in the face of climate change and many other challenges. But Steve, before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about your background. You didn't have the opportunity to take over a family farm, but you really wanted to be a farmer, right?
That is true. So that's where, and I should start by saying I consider Ron a mentor, especially with him writing the book and our involvement with PFI. But our experience differs in that although he was able to go back to the farm, I didn't have a farm to go back to. My wife, Sarah, and I started farming by renting a small farm and renting dairy cows, which was considered unheard of at the time that we started 35 years ago. And it came about through a series of circumstances where we were able to rent the dairy herd of Paul and Pat Johnson when Paul, who I know a number of people know about him, he was running for the state legislature, and he wasn't sure if he would be winning that election or not, so he agreed to rent us cows. And it was beneficial for us because it enabled us to get started farming in a low-cost way. And so we were able to rent a small dairy farm in the Decorah area. I had a strong interest in intensive rotational grazing that goes by different names, but we started renting a small pasture-based dairy farm in the Decorah area and subdivided the pastures into about 40 different paddocks and began one of the first rotational grazing-based dairies in Iowa at that Decorah farm.
I mentioned that you've done a lot of work, Steve, in the arena of regenerative agriculture. And for people who aren't familiar with these terms, we've talked about sustainable agriculture, which means that we're not extracting from the land, we're not making it less than what it is. Describe regenerative agriculture.
I would say that you latched onto it. Regeneration means building upon that, and as opposed to just sustaining, regenerating does mean building. We're trying to build soils. We're trying to use farming that is healthy not just for the land and the waters, but also the communities in which those farms exist. And so I think regenerative agriculture includes building not just soil health and building health of our waters, but also building health of our communities. And I believe that Ron would agree with me in that description.
And we have only about a minute here before we go to break, Steve. So, Ron was talking earlier about the research being done, the on-farm research being done that has just grown over the years through work with Iowa State University, but Practical Farmers of Iowa. And we will talk about the Leopold Center and how that's not a force these days in just a moment. But this is a time where we're learning a lot about this. Does this feel like a really exciting time to be involved in this field?
I think so. There's a lot of change going on, but certainly being able to take advantage of on-farm research like Ron has done and so many great PFI farmers have been able to do during the years that PFI has been in existence. Sarah and I, my wife and I, also benefited from some small grants that we did on our farm on rotational grazing, and they were research grants through PFI and through the Leopold Center about 35 years ago to take a look at the pasture quantity and pasture quality that we were getting through our small rotational grazing-based dairy farm.
We're going to have to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. I am talking with Steve Hopkins and Ron Rosmann. Ron Rosmann is one of the founding members of Practical Farmers of Iowa. Steve Hopkins is also a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News. It's Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. This hour, I'm talking with Ron Rosmann. He has been farming for more than 50 years near Harlan, and he is one of the founding members of Practical Farmers of Iowa. He's published his memoir. It's called A Practical Farmer's Journey, A History of Community, Stewardship, and Resilience. There is a PFI Field Day on the Rosmann family farm coming up on August 22nd. He'll also be on the far side of the state, speaking at Pulpit Rock Brewing in Decorah at 7 p.m. on October 27th. Also with us is Steve Hopkins. He's also a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa and an innovator in regenerative agriculture and water conservation. He's a former dairy farmer and spent many years working for the Department of Natural Resources. And one of the things that I find really fascinating about Practical Farmers of Iowa, Ron, is that you and others involved in the group very early on, you really have built this very powerful community. And you write a lot about how sad you have been to see our rural communities in Iowa, including the one that you grew up in, really lose so much of what made them really strong and wonderful places to grow up, at least during your childhood. Ron, tell me a little bit about how you think about community and farming and rural Iowa.
Well, yeah, very much so. I'm sorry here. I think back to the values that my parents instilled in all of their children. There were 4 boys in our family, and I forgot to mention our third son, Mark. He works in international agriculture down through the Foreign Agricultural Service in Bogota, Colombia. Right now is where he and his wife are stationed. So, but these values that my dad had were so important to our community because my dad happened to was able to purchase two 160-acre farms in the 40s after World War II that he rented out to beginning farmers, but they had to be members of our local community in Westphalia. And a number of farmers got their start doing that, and are still farming today, or they're people after them are continuing to farm. So that is a very important thing in terms of how do we keep rural communities alive and thriving. And what it means is we have to keep working for community development and new ways to create job opportunities for young people so that they can stay in the state, both in farming, but also in other sectors of local food economies, for instance. It's all very important.
And Steve, I know that that's an important part of how you think about farming as well. I mean, we talked earlier about how Ron believes we need more farmers, not fewer farmers in Iowa, but to create and regenerate our rural communities. I mean, this is an important part of making community strong again, too, isn't it?
It is. I agree with Ron entirely on that point. And it's not easy to do, to talk about having more farmers at a time when we see a shrinking number of farmers. However, if we do some of the things that Ron was suggesting, having more local food produced or more food that's processed here in Iowa, that enables more dollars to stay in our rural communities and does allow people to stay in those rural communities and farm. We're seeing in the Decorah area a number of small operations that are either providing vegetables for restaurants or community-supported agriculture or farmers markets. And there are, I think, a lot more opportunities like that, or at least could be developed like that around the state. But it doesn't just happen. It does require that we develop programs to enable people to get funding for that to happen. So I think it's a policy issue as well, and I know that's something that Ron talks about in his book, is policy needs for the state to help grow the state from within.
Well, policy needs not just in that sense, but also, Ron, you write about the nutrient reduction strategy that, of course, was introduced years ago, and we haven't seen a whole lot of impact as far as clean water goes in Iowa from that. You think some changes need to be made there as well?
Yes, and those changes need to be made based on the sound science of when to put your inputs of fertilizer on, but maybe more importantly, that you can, if we encouraged more diverse rotations, more crops, certainly a third crop in Iowa, but did not take forested land and pasture land out of production, and putting them to corn, then we would greatly improve our water quality and our runoff problems. But it's very ironic that beef is how prices are extremely high in the supermarket, and the supply is very low because of both a lot of circumstances of taking land out of pastures and droughts and so forth. And I think a point that needs to be made worldwide is that United States does not do a good job of recognizing the food sovereignty of other developing countries. So what I mean by that is they should be able to grow the bulk of their own food and support themselves, and not fall into this trap of the United States, feeding the world. The world can feed themselves if they have the tools to do it.
Ron, you mentioned frequently in the book, the question that you get all the time is, okay, you're an organic farmer. Could everyone farm this way? Could we grow the food that we need if everyone farmed organically, sustainably, or even regeneratively? What is your answer to that?
I think we could, because we're certainly not feeding ourselves now. As I said earlier, we import 95% of our food into this state. So we're not feeding ourselves. And look at the number of people that are going hungry in this country. And right in this state, for instance, it's terrible. It's very, very sad. And I lost my train of thought here, but
it's okay. Why don't I let Steve jump in on that too? Because Steve, I'm sure that's a question you get all the time as well.
I get that question. What I would say about that is that Ron is a master farmer, and so he has, through studying what goes on in his farm, perfected the different crop rotations. And I think we have a number of great farmers in Iowa that could learn a lot from Ron and what has happened over time. And changing over to organic farming systems wouldn't happen overnight. It would take a lot of effort, and that's partly what PFI does with a big tent, so to speak, where it has so many different members who farm in different ways. It creates a great opportunity for discussion among those farmers about how to practically make changes, make farming work, and it's not necessarily organic. So in that sense, it does a great job of providing that discussion for farmers across the state.
I want to ask you, Ron spent the last couple of chapters in the book writing about climate change, the science of climate change, and also how it's affecting people here in Iowa already. And Steve, I want to ask you, you spent many years working for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and you have said that there were times when writing about climate change and climate science was discouraged. Is this something that we are actively turning a blind eye toward in this state?
Well, I'm hoping that is changing, and it is true that at a time that I was working on a project with the Iowa DNR to help update the state's non-point source management plan, I was directed to remove a section that we had put together about climate change. We did a workaround. We changed the language. We shortened the section. But I disagreed with that because I felt that we did need to address climate change, and we still do need to address climate change. And to Ron's credit, he writes about that as a farmer, and in fact, he wrote about how climate change must be at the top of the list in what we address. And that's how I felt as well when I was working for the Iowa DNR.
So we only have, Ron, go ahead.
Well, I would like to just add that I would be remiss without commending Steve for the many years of work, both as being a farmer with very little, but creating a lot from that very little, and then for all his work, 24 years with the DNR. He's had a wealth of experience, and that's why I wanted to have Steve on the program today, because of his commitments. And so, yeah, that's where we're at.
Right. Before we run out of time, I want to talk about just what you feel are the most pressing issues right now for farmers and Iowans. But Ron, before we dive into that very quickly, farming is a business, and it's important to farmers that the business be profitable. I think it's important to underline the fact that there are many changes that you've made on your farm as far as becoming organic certified and your sustainable measures that have allowed you to make it a profitable business. Just reflect on that for a moment. This is a way that farmers can also meet their financial goals, right?
Yes, very much so. Back in the 80s, the phrase was you were supposed to lower your inputs. That was called LISA, Low Input Sustainable Agriculture. That was the acronym. So I said to myself, well, you can lower your input costs to nothing and not survive unless you get more for your product. And that's one reason why we became certified organic. We're selling corn today for $9.50 a bushel, for instance, and oats for human consumption for, $6.50 or so a bushel, and so on and so forth. And that's, and I should say, we have 8 tractors, for instance. We have 4 old tractors that we're still using that are over 50 years old, but we also have 4 front wheel assist tractors, 2 of which I bought new. So, you don't have to, in other words, we've made some money, and we've been able to keep updating our equipment, and that's very important in terms of long-term sustainability. So Yeah, but now, like I said earlier, the costs of robotics, etc., artificial intelligence, computerization, uh,
That's a big barrier
farmers,
to entry
yes,
for new
farmers are
farmers.
asking for, or PFI farmers are asking for equipment that just plain works. We don't need all of this technology. It's not helping us to do a better job. It is making money for the people that are creating these technologies and not for us as farmers.
So we only have 2 minutes left, and Ron, just very quickly, your book it's a story of your community, it's a story of the land, it's the story of your family and farming and these innovations that you have been able to be a part of. What do you want people to take away from your story?
I want people to have a clear knowledge and a clear historical account of what has happened uh, over the centuries of farming in this country, and that will help better inform them so that they can make intelligent decisions and not just be swayed by information that is being fed to them daily that says we have to keep continuing down this model and type of agriculture and food that we are now currently kind of stuck with.
In 30 seconds, Steve, what do you want to add to that? What do you hope people take away from Ron's story?
I hope that people recognized how much effort Ron put into writing this book, because not only has he been able to farm full time, but he devoted 9 years to writing this book, which is biographical and talks in detail about his regenerative farming, and also addresses really important questions to Iowa, and including having a subtitle of one chapter called Glyphosate and Cancer. And we all know that cancer is a big issue. Water quality is a big issue in Iowa. And Ron addresses that in this book.
Steve Hopkins, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
And Ron Rosmann, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Charity. It was a wonderful opportunity.
Ron Rosmann is the author of A Practical Farmer's Journey, A History of Community, Stewardship and Resilience. Steve Hopkins is also a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa and an innovator in regenerative agriculture and water conservation. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe.